Okay, welcome. This is a kind of follow-up video to the last one on Poetic Initiation. Um, I've titled it The Motherlode. Um, I wanted to get more into that third stage that I mentioned in the last video. I'm just going to pull a tarot card. I like to do this. Sometimes it gives you a sense of what's going to happen or what is happening. The Emperor. Um, the Motherlode. I actually already did a video on this, and the mic volume was not high enough. I'm still struggling with some bits of technology. I'm not used to doing this, so I thought I'd redo it. It was a weird decision to make because these are kind of semi, at least, improvised talks. So sometimes some good stuff comes out that you don't plan and you'd want to keep. And so redoing a video, you kind of like, do I want to redo it and then lose some of those insights that came out of the improvised talk? But we're going to give it a go anyway. I might go on for a little bit longer than the other video, um, just because all of the kind of draft video that I made has been germinating in me for the last 24 hours or so. And so I might be able to add other comments as well. There's going to be some readings in this video, just to kind of illustrate some of my points. And again, it's going to be fairly autobiographical. The Motherlode. I guess the thing to say first of all is, what is this sense of freedom that you get from writing, particularly if you've been writing for as long as I have? You analyze the stages that I mentioned and you reflect on how things are going with you from one year to the next, and you question what, I guess you could say, the nature of inspiration, or something a bit generic like that. I'm thinking of something even wider, really, and it's not restricted to poetry. It's more about creativity in general, opening yourself up to forces that you wouldn't have imagined existing, perhaps when you began on your journey with say poetry or any creative discipline. So for those purposes, I'm going to reference that kind, those stages that I mentioned yesterday, and get into the third stage of my development a lot more, and try to make some reflections on what inspiration, or finding your zone, as they say in music. And there will be a lot of music parallels in this because, as I think I mentioned yesterday, I was in music a lot when I was younger, and I've since returned to it, doing busking and playing music nearly every day. I mean, with the busking, I was playing at least 4 times a week, as much as 4 times a week. Not doing so much of it now for obvious reasons. So I want to go back to that time and make some connections between different creative disciplines, hopefully. Stage 3, if I was to demarcate the stages to years, stage 1 was freeform, so it was from when I began writing at 16, which I've already talked about. Stage two would probably be somewhere around um, the early noughties, probably. I lived in London for a while in 2001 and 2, I think. Uh, Possibly, definitely 2002, and then I moved to Korea in 2003. I think that's all kind of stage one in a way. I'm not going to get into that stage because I think that's the more depressing side. I think the poetry suffered, um, and perhaps it had something to do with the politics of the times as well. Um, but let's get into that last stage, which would I would say I was briefly back in England for about a year and a half in 2006 7. So I would say this stage began with a very specific poem in 2000, written in 2011, and I actually read this poem in that practice version. I'm going to read it again, but I didn't realize when it was published. As usual, you tend to remember when they're written, or at least I do. So that poem was written um, in the middle of 2011. Um, my personal circumstances, I'll go into those a little bit because I think it's important to know, because if you've got a title as grandiose as the Motherlode, saying that you can tap into infinite amounts of creativity, it might be useful to give some personal background to how that happened for me. I'm not saying I'm an avatar or a perfect example of that, but it's definitely a change in the way I approach writing. Um, okay, so 2011, I was living in Korea. I'd moved there in 2003, but like I said, I was briefly back in England the years previous, not the immediately previous years, but like I say, 2007ish. And I was doing a creative writing course. I'll go into that in another video. So I'd been back in Korea um, with my partner um, um, during that time. And I'd been working on a long sequence called To Insanity, which again I had ready for a collection. It didn't pan out. There was actually a published poem that came out previous to that, um, and it was a long poem called MMV. It's 2005 in Latin, um, which I was working on the course. But To Insanity was kind of a follow up to that, and I was interested in long projects, at that time, in terms of just having a long poem that you could do. That's since not really something I'm interested in. Um, To Insanity, I would deem as the last poem between stages 2 and 3, and I'm going to read. In the practice version, I only read the one that came after that, but I'm actually going to read both. I think that will give you a sense of what I was thinking about at the end of stage 2, and then what this newer approach was. And I don't know how it will strike you. I don't know how it strikes me reading it again, to be honest. But it's some kind of demarcation. I was living in a place called Gwangju in South Korea, in the western side of that peninsula. So you'd have about 4 or 5 big major cities in South Korea. Seoul being the most populated, and then Busan second, and then you go down the line. Like Gwangju, the place where I was living, is probably the sixth biggest city in the country. But I was living outside of the centre. It wasn't super urban where I was living, although generally you have to be in urban environments if you want to make a living. And I was making a living as a teacher. I think I'd gone part-time wasn't particularly enjoying living there. I was also living with my mother-in-law as well as my partner, and I just wanted a change. And because I was working part-time, I'd probably had a chance to take stock of the last few years of teaching and decided to look into teaching in another location in Korea. So I got an interview in Busan. I think it would be that summer of 2011, and I started the job in September. And the circumstances for the poem I'm going to read and focus on more, which is the beginning of this stage, is a poem called Angelology, which I wrote at the end of that month in August, I think it was. The only reason I know is because I was due to begin teaching in September. And I'd gone to Busan ahead of my partner, and I was just staying in some kind of temporary accommodation. They hadn't given me, usually in Korea, if people know if they've taught abroad, especially in Asia, they usually either pay for your accommodation or organize your accommodation, and you tend to pay bills. I don't know, some situations are different, but generally that was the rule. So they'd given me this like temporary accommodation, and I ended up writing this poem, Angelology. So that was how it happened. What changed in the way that I looked at that poem and the way that I'd looked at the stuff previous? Perhaps I'll leave that until after I've read the poem. Anyway, so that's kind of setting the scene. So I was in this, like, it felt like a bit of a hotel room or a temporary situation. I think I was only there for maybe a couple of weeks at the very most. And yeah, not really looking after myself too well, just hanging out, eating in local restaurants and trying to get to grips with the new environment, and then possibly, having a few meetings with the new staff that I was going to be working with. So I wrote this one evening. Both of these poems, fortuitously, were published in the Black Herald. I can't remember. I probably mentioned them yesterday. The day before when I made the other video. So, Angelology. It's in two parts, short parts. 1. Who most kind, withered and rearing up city tonight? Life's vacant mystery ever bursting, oh so formally, brothers and sisters, shall to tell it, their stone heads humongous in this night of the brains, left, right, and they similarly hollow-eyed and inviting. Peoples, but not so fast, canines turning in spear-bright dark, nights fairies, their instances dissolved in tepid, solid, jumping hours, their skulls bobbing, lamps glowing on the shelves, dormant and eternally strange in their tirednesses. But angels, your kernel of wings unknotting, unbringing, who sleep out a clockhood, in and out of time. Which is illusion in the world, which is illusion? Oracle, who is only guide, who cannot tell, in her brownness of birds, of the feast of dracons, of after them. So be wise, Kemosabe, turn well in your turning. And that first section was in memoriam to James Urmson, who is an old childhood friend. I might mention him in other videos. 2. My God, who is the glad plinth of light resting on a pillow this morning, bringer of the death of the old body, who I cap, uncap in the tap jar of a lens, snowy moth flapping, hard and yellow and bright. An ancient drum standing on a pillow in the toppled morning. Country of faces fluttering, unbudged, laughing. One thermal trembling. Oh, shedding of heat for a glassy wing on a pillow. Idyllic, serene, granite emblem of musty attentions, who I am cold or called to face. And above, the endless alcoves, above, among endless luminal dimensions. Our frothing edges, among. Yeah, strange reading it again. I haven't read it very often. I've maybe looked at it a few times. So that was the poem that I wrote at the end of August in Busan. It was published in 2012. I don't know if these magazines are still going. I think they're still producing books, as I said. Should I read the other poem now or not? I'll just give some more sense of that. It was a feeling of freedom, having to, that sense of looking at a poem the following day, or just you glance back at it. Maybe I didn't know the significance of it immediately. But there was something about it that was different, and it was not, it could be argued in my own mind that it wasn't much to do with the words that I was using. Maybe I could look at certain phrases and see that that was different. There was a kind of a permission going on. There's also a connection here with Cesar Vallejo, who's the inspiration for the title of this magazine. And some of the people I was talking to at the time liked that poet, the Peruvian poet. It was partially him, but only very, very, very partially. It was more to do with the way you develop spiritually or whatever over time. It was a kind of freedom of language that was a bit different from the earlier poems. There's a kind of need with a lot of younger writers and with my younger self, which is to make sense, have a message, have something to say. You feel a certain pressure if you want to publish poetry, write poetry for publishing. And that can do all kinds of things to you. It can do all kinds of things to your process. And that's dangerous, I would say. And so if I was going to give any summary of the difference in attitude between the second and third phases, it would be that you just throw yourself into language. All possibilities are open. It's very strange because even if you're in your 20s in something, if you have anything akin to a second stage, because you can consciously say the same things as I'm saying to you now, which is dive into language or be very kind of give a kind of romantic or heroic sheen on the way that you looked at the way what you're writing. So the shift is almost imperceptible. The words have a fresher meaning to you when you're older. All possibilities are open, I would say, suddenly. And the poem perhaps is a permission in itself. You look at it and you go, so I can go that way. I guess all poems are like that to a degree. And this is purely for me because I was thinking about when I gave this talk on the Motherlode the other day. it might not be specific to the way that you've developed at all. The reason I thought it was significant for me was because it was very, the previous stages, and particularly the second stage, had been very thoughtful and premeditated is a good word, and perhaps unconsciously premeditated. You feel the pressure to have a message, to change the world, possibly, although the famous Auden statement says poetry changes nothing, or something to that effect. And maybe he was right. But yes, there was some sense of like, you're thinking these things out too much. It's all a bit too systematic. You're carrying your influences very heavily. You are nothing, if you're going to be really brutal on yourself, you're nothing but the heavy bag of poetry books that you've read and enjoyed, and you're basically copying them, you bastard. That's the voice of the uber critical conscience. And I think what happened when I went to university to do creative writing was that I unconsciously imbibed too much of certain writers, and perhaps even the writers who were on the course. And I'm going to get into this topic a bit more because I've gotten into, chakras and auras and stuff like that, which is awful vocab for people who hate the New Age, but I'm not really promoting the New Age. I do think, mingling with different people affects your creative impulses, and that can be good or it can be bad. And they're not necessarily bad people for influencing you that way. It's all you're doing at the end of the day. So yeah, it was a freeing up. I used the example of, I already mentioned it, the zone. Especially in jazz or spontaneous improvised music, or music that has at least parts of it improvised. And because I've been busking, I can feel those parallels a lot closer than I used to, because I've been doing music very regularly for a while. But it is the zone, and it is that sense of, you watch somebody just perform an amazing, perhaps a solo on an instrument, on a guitar. I always use the guitar because that's my instrument. And they'll play that thing, and you'll be amazed, and you'll talk to them afterwards maybe, and you'll analyze it down, and you'll say, you might ask them, what was the scale you were playing, or what key, I'd know the key probably from sight. What scale were you doing? And my point in all this is just to say the answer would probably be, particularly if that zone has any efficacy, they wouldn't know. They wouldn't be able to tell you. Perhaps they could give you some vague instructions on the key and what they'd done in the past with that solo. But I think if you go deep into it and that person's deep in that zone, they couldn't even tell you what they were doing, which is quite interesting. And it is that mystery, and it's mirrored in all kinds of other disciplines. I mean, mysticism is full of this stuff. St. John of the Cross is full of this stuff. The mystery, embrace the mystery. What is the other one I heard on the internet recently? Brian Rose saying, go where the fear is. Some form of fear and mystery that has to be confronted in yourself. And it's a very private thing, and it's also the reason why a lot of the great poems that you read now and don't think of too much in terms of production, or at least you can look at it lackadaisically like that, came out of unpublished poems that the poet didn't want to publish or didn't feel the need to publish. And it's because of that private element, that deeply private element. And that's not to say I like the slushy, super feely poetry that you get, even comes out of you when you're a teenager, because you in an amateurish way, you see poetry as a form of feeling primarily, and you emote desperately. Where was I with that? Yeah, but the mystery. I'm not saying keep feelings out. In fact, I'm trying to get into that a bit more later. It's something about embracing the mystery. Um, what happened with me was that perhaps I began with feelings, and thoughts and feelings got heightened, and then thought took over, and this sense, this post 9/11 sense of a world gone wrong, which I do kind of think it has gone wrong. I'm not a pessimist by any means, but it's a very strange era that we're in. Very sanitized and idiotic. And that kind of comes into this because I'm going to go into insanity. But that was prevalent in my mind, this sense of addressing an issue and giving a message. But I found after a while that thought had become too prevalent in the process, and feeling had lost its way as a consequence. And I was reading Jung's Liber Novus, the bread book, the other day, and there's something in that in the first 50 to, I don't know, it's the first few parts of the book, and he's talking about that, the fact that humans can never spiritually progress without getting over feeling and thought. He calls it forethought in the translation. I'm a bit worried about that translation. I think it's also just suggested that he just calls it the idea. So the idea becomes too prevalent that's what I'm saying happened with me. But he's saying a balance has to be found between feeling and thought. If feelings get too prevalent, you're in a bad situation. If thought gets too prevalent, you're in a bad situation. So the thing is to find an equilibrium. And there's all kinds of theories that have been thrown into the mix over the centuries, particularly in relation to poetry. I mean, Poe, Edgar Allan Poe says, what is it? Poetry is passion. So he would definitely be going for that before lateral thinking. I'm not saying that is totally correct. To be quite honest, I'm probably more of I go on my feelings more, but I know that the feelings in this geopolitical epoch craziness that we're in now, feelings can also be manipulated. So to kind of have an ethic of pure feeling for poetry, that could be a problematic thing. So, but yeah, the reading of the Jung the other day was interesting because it talks more about a balance, and that humans hardly ever have the balance correct, and so they're endlessly making the most basic of errors. Yeah, so that's pretty much all I want to say from the poem Angelology. I'll read the other one, and like I said earlier, To Insanity was kind of the second long poem that I'd attempted, and it's the end of that way of doing things, really. And this is a longer piece, so I hope I've got the stamina for it. Let's see what happens. There's actually, I didn't realise because I've not looked at this for a while, there is a little explanation at the beginning of it, because I think I sent that to them because I didn't know how much of this long poem they were going to publish. So they published the little preface, and then they took what they needed from the whole piece. And I haven't looked at this poem for years and years. I can't remember. I think I tried to write. The idea of it was based on Spencer's Shepherd's Calendar. So I was going to write a poem for every week of the year. It was very kind of structured. I'm not much good at that anymore. So the poems were numbered, and they were numbered from one week to the next. So there's usually seven days between each one, but I think the magazine just chose whatever they wanted to look at. God knows, I mean, I feel for them. Did they have to read the whole thing? I can't remember if I gave them maybe I gave them selections. I don't know. I don't know if I could read the whole thing now. So yeah, so the thing's called To Insanity, and it says it was written for the 120th anniversary of the onset of Friedrich Nietzsche's madness. To Insanity is the story of a year which loosely follows the structure of Spencer's Shepherd's Calendar, given in a weekly letter format. The reading of a news headline begins a psychological journey that weds present media events to autobiographical materials, fragments from the imagined life of Nietzsche and other narratives. Juxtaposed, these dislocated voices create their own take on our disturbingly sanitized political present. And I wrote that on March 14th, 2009. So this was when I was deep into the poem, I guess. Okay, do I want to read? I'll try and read all of these sections. I've not read this for ages. I should have really just done a practice before this video, but let's see how we go. So they're all random different numbers for different weeks. 15th of January, number 3, titled Mental Health. They will go up, she says, up and up, the numbers. The numbers are up, all going up. All of them are mad now. Words in books, etc. A forest of telephones, consulted like doctors. Long, deciphering moans of student nurses in hallways. Much doing and doing and doing, in order to maintain absolute stasis. For us good. Good. So, let me be mad enough to sing this heaven, to see the birds escaping our harness of wars, hate, and mulled messages on low, our speech for screaming street signs. Autonomy, opinioned up among silences, agendered. We be the hater with the mouth, strange frosts beached in our lungs. What? Be this your strange matter, rowing in here? Think, in a hairy soup. 22nd of January, number 4, titled Benevolence. And now, quite happily, wisdom receded to brute hammers and post-idyllic, idealic, post-post tongues, the shoreline, idealism. I am going to eat everything. It be not a matter of sharing. Let the madman eat first. Sharing is what we do, they say. I'm going to eat my mouth first, and then your host, the rest of me. There was insignia, which is memory, which I have revivified, i.e. history, realigned to my hunger. There will be a gene for me in future. And then, exactly, you'll be cured, and all the harder to admit your new leader got it wrong. Someone, anyone, will be enough. But anyway, I'm going to call all of it reality. '11th of March, number 11, entitled From Life. My other grandmother pictured in my mind. insane. Long grey hair tentacling, and long dirty fingernails curling down to a table. Grandfather, where'd you been? What made yours? Life? Birth? Something in mail that never reached you, got lost? To pull out madness from a man. Define it. Hold it to the light. One great stony thing, almost impossible. Your untouched, unsaid memory. Light that waned into nothing but rumour, mild embarrassment, passport to silence only. What is left of the human in the eyes of the earth? Something akin to this? Howling stone where each breath fails to show up, and this, and this. I think I got the first line wrong. I think I said grandmother, I meant grandfather. My other grandfather pictured in my mind. That's more autobiographical. 1st of April, number 14. The Penguin. It's called The Penguin. The cold is a long painful vowel in a language that bears you and tears at you with surgical meanings. So, in this, please be cold, copy cold rumours, blow spiky kisses, and talk of cold skies, with your baggage leaving a brittle thump against you, as buildings catch cold breath, as fumes, a woolen down, clinging to distance, my waddled way home, fuming at numerous cold doors. I'm not the great frown you thought I was, or collector of hearts, or the badge for greater pasts, or farmer for more profound things. Only a thing myself, caught or salvaged in gabbing white, blinking star, or starry king among interminable snows, a caked storm that whips, 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 and cannot be calmed. There's problems with that one, I think. I mean, just from a writing perspective. I'll get into that later, maybe. In some ways, again, this is the poem that ended that stage, so probably I have problems with some of these things. 8th of July, number 28, Turin. At night I walk the streets aware of everywhere, manifest in snowy brittle heres. I unpick the town from my hair like a beautiful scab, and scatter its bits like rose petals over the pavements. Lead somewhere else, or lead back beyond Christ. Ha! You can't, can you? Seas blab and ooze from a desert's knuckles, laid bare, quiet suffering shores, as inland streets sack this night air here, where my aching head bobs. A black lantern in the black night, black candle in the mind. Did I have a woman once, or was it an empire? Was my thirst native or slaver? Listen to Tse's crabbed hands, as if somewhere someone worries whether I'll be my next kill. _22 of July, number 30, called The Riddler. The poem could be experience, and to admire is to admire the letting go of the page. We all did this also. We all did this? Or didn't? Or couldn't know? Across received pronunciations I've to gather something. whatever I need, and God knows I'll need, from a crushed legacy. Protect me, sire, from my want. And there've been climates and destinations filled with want. Travel seems an opening up, strange edit of a detuned older memory. Sad victim of wisdom. Self, ever starting. Taking out the strange passport at the haggling border of some annotated second, a dream of knowledge at the stranger's door, portal to unsmelt air, in which the ear knocks gently, and you try to answer. So that was where my head was at in 2009 and possibly 10. The poem was edited beyond that published version, I think, and was gathered into a manuscript. Then I edited the PDF and had it ready for publication, and then I pulled it at the last minute. I could have gone on with it. We were just going to self-publish it. Perhaps one day I'll put the thing together. But I noticed even in the re-edits, what seemed to be happening was it was less topical, less and less and less topical, and more and more and more language games. Whether that's a good thing or a bad, I don't know. And there didn't seem much point in talking about my own personal situation. So there's indications of stage 3 in that poem, in a sense, because there is wordplay, strange juxtapositions and things like that. But and also I was kind of using Nietzsche as a kind of sounding board for things, for philosophical ideas that I was getting annoyed about or ruminating on, or different feelings. A lot of influences fell away from me after that with the writing of Angelology, the first poem. Nietzsche was one of them. So it's funny that he's such a presence in that last poem, To Insanity. That will have to be reserved for another video. Lots of influences fell away, and there was kind of like a void, which really has not been filled, but it was kind of a useful void, if you know what I mean. Because you find your own space in some sense, and it's not physical space, psychic space, could you say that? I also kind of gave up on continental philosophy, modern philosophy. A lot of it had to go. When I was in Galway last year or so, I think I had this conversation with somebody, or some similar topic, When you're an artist, when you're, or at least attempting to be one, living it, trying to live it, embody whatever that is, the being an artist, you kind of have to give up philosophy, really. I mean, it's I wouldn't discourage anybody from reading philosophy. You have to go through it. It's a stepping stone. If you don't go through it as a person who's in their teens and early 20s in our shitty education system that we're in, if you don't have at least a foot in the door, you've read a few books in that genre, in that thing of philosophy, then you're in trouble. So do it. But I think maybe as you get older, I mean, I'll do another video on philosophy as well, and the philosophers I like and the philosophers I don't like. So anyway, Nietzsche fell away. A lot of philosophy fell away. I studied philosophy at university. I was very excited about it, and because I didn't do it at school, so it was very new, and new things tend to get me going, you know. So, how old would I be in 2009? That's another question. 32. The other thing to say, and this is topic for another video as well, is conspiracy and geopolitics. And anyone who's close to my age would know that the YouTube sphere was really kind of somewhere between 2005 and 10 was really coming up, at least in my awareness, but I don't think I'm the only one. It was really gathering steam. There's lots of information from different places that you wouldn't normally have gotten before that. And I'll try to devote a video to that. So that was playing into this, as well as the abandoning of certain philosophers from my past. I wouldn't totally dismiss Nietzsche. I mean, I still want to have a go at Thus Spake Zarathustra. I think that's the only book I didn't finish. All of the other books I read because I just had this enthusiasm, and that's another video. I'm one of these people who likes the saturation job. You know, when you get an author and they're new to you, and you just go, okay, I'm going to read everything. I'm not being arrogant. It's just like something that if it depends on the person. But if I find someone who's very interesting, then I want to know everything they have to say. Same thing happened with Jack Kerouac when I was in my late teen. The era that I was telling you about in the last video. In fact, that was one book that was recommended to me by my literature teacher. Kerouac as a writer. So yeah, the saturation job. That's actually Charles Olson's phrase, but you get my drift. Reading everything of a person. So it was an ethos, philosophy, addressing the world, having a message, wanting to say something. You're still young, and perhaps there's a naivety there that's useful. I don't want anyone to watch this video and say those things can't be done in poetry. I'm saying they weren't useful to me necessarily. After that poem Angelology, losing all of that baggage allowed me to just be a hell of a lot more productive. To Insanity was a scream against the world, as if it was not a part of me, as if it was a wild beast that needed to be shouted at. It's the television screen that needs to be screamed at. That you can only do that for so long. It's like Bob Dylan, what is it? I've only got so many fingers. Why don't you write any more finger pointing songs? I've only got so many fingers. And again, it's useful that I mentioned Jung, because the Red Book is definitely about that. He splits it into. I'm only mentioning this because I'm reading it at the moment. The voice from the depths and the voice of the times, or something to that effect. So To Insanity would be the voice of the times that I've objectified and am addressing and howling and getting quite frustrated at. And perhaps that's useful for you to read, possibly not, I don't know, in the long term. But it was a drain on me, and Angelology and this third stage kind of herald the solution. Anyway, I already mentioned a lot more productive. So 2-3 poems, maybe before that, poem a week, couple of poems a week if I'm lucky. Obviously it's a lot more complex. This was also a long time ago, so I can't be too specific. But after that, 2-3 poems a day sometimes. It's like, there are examples of people when they hit the Motherlode. Everybody hits it in a slightly different way, but there are certain common themes. Massive production. What is it? Keats's Great Year. He's just on fire. Sylvia Plath, in the last 4 or 5 months of her life, I'm less of a fan of hers these days, but it just bubbles to the surface, and you get your mojo, as they say. So a lot more productive all the way through the following years, and I think probably may have hit a peak in that ethos, in that stage around 2016. And also, I hate to say it, when your life is fucking horrible and you don't know what the hell is going on and you're in chaos, it does produce some damn good poems. I hate to say it. And so, I don't know whether I want to get further into that, but yeah, much production, lots of poems. I don't know how many. That's why I have problems publishing now, because I have so much that ordering everything, putting it into books, having a sequence, putting them into the right order, having a title for a book, all the rest of it. Most of the poems that came out after that don't have titles. New influences, as the old influences were lost to me or were seen in a very different light. I think I said it's like looking at a picture of an old friend from a different angle, like the relationships changed. So a lot of those old influences, disappear or are seen in a different light, and then new writers come in, and some of them you may have read partially before, and some of them are totally new to you. So who would be coming into my life more later? Emily Dickinson, big time. I started thinking about James Joyce in a different way. César Vallejo was important for a time, but not recently, not for a good few years, and I don't particularly like his politics, but that's maybe because my politics have changed drastically over that decade as well. E. Cummings, big time. If you go to my website, The Fiend, you get some sense of that, because I think the website was set up around that period that the To Insanity was published, so perhaps it was set up a little bit earlier, and then it kind of goes defunct about 5 years ago or something. And some of the early content at that site shows that I've not really got direction yet. I was reading a lot of, reading and listening to pen sound audio and getting caught up in a lot of kind of American Marxist poetry or personalities that would be not of very much use to me. I wasn't really like reading it heavily, but I was definitely on the fringes, and I was trying to, because I'd come out of, I don't know if I mentioned this in the earlier video or in the Poetic Growth video. I didn't really read widely in poetry until I got into my at least mid-20s, and then maybe 30, like reading all forms of English language poetry all the way through the 20th century. And then I had to throw it all away, or a lot of it away, because it wasn't good enough, to me anyway. So, for example, the message poetry, the overtly political poems of Allen Ginsberg came from a much earlier time in my life, and that fell away. But it was on the wane anyway. I've talked to other people about this, but it fell away in my late 20s. Absolutely. You can still talk to people about those two big poems, Howl and Kaddish, and there is something to be said for them. but no. You know, with Ginsberg, it's I have got a problem with him as a person as well, and I'll get into that later. But it's just you're hammering away at something when you're reading somebody and they've got a point, and you know their point, and you've heard them say it before, and they're hammering away at it again, and it's like, so you pick up a poem, you know, the last collection of Allen Ginsberg. I mean, it sounds like you're reveling in this guy's decline. Hopefully, it's not. Doesn't I don't mean to be that cruel about it, but you know, what is it? Letters to I can't remember the late poems like Democracy, Bill Clinton, this kind of stuff, and it's I'm reading it. Having read a lot of the collected poems, I think I had a copy of the book, and it's just like, Jesus, Alan, will you give it up? Or at least put the enemy into a new light, look at them from a new perspective. I mean, there's lots to say about the Clintons, for fuck's sake, you know. Some really dark, horrific stuff. But I don't know. It's like you can't hammer away making points. We're a lot more humorous and ambiguous, you know, people are. And that's not to give up on the political, but it's just like there's a lot of dynamism in a person bodily, physiologically, spiritually. We're incredibly complex, and language has to kind of make use of all of it. I've also given the example in the past of like, you know, when somebody dies that's close to you, you don't, maybe this person didn't agree with you on anything, or maybe very few things you could actually agree on. If you talked about the macrocosm, you know, the world, the nation, Europe or something, you might not have nothing in common or very little. You still grieve the person, don't you? I'm interested in that from a language perspective, from a poetry perspective, because the presence of a person, particularly for a child or for a growing adult, that's what you miss when somebody dies. You don't necessarily miss. I mean, you do miss. I mean, if somebody's a great orator or a great poet, obviously, you should weep and moan about the lack of that input in your life or in the life of a nation or the world. But there is something very basic and elemental, which is the presence of a person in a room. We get that all the time. We get a lot of bad poetry out of that as well. But I mean, we get a lot of poetry out of physical interaction, social engagement, the very immediate circumstances of life. So kind of use that. I mean, use it in an inventive way. I mean, as I say, I dived into language, so just try. It's hard to say try because, and this is another problem. How much of this can you teach? Um, because it's so much to do with your own development as a person. Anyway, I'll try and slow down on that. The other reading I wanted to give to um, try to illustrate what I was getting at in overthinking something, which I think illustrates a lot. And I've used D.H Lawrence on my website before, but I've never commented on this essay, which I really like, which I'm going to read, just to try to illustrate this sense of freedom and what it is and what it isn't. If I can find the thing. Hold on. The essay is called Insouciance. I've linked to it online when I've been online. It's pretty short. Insouciance, and Lawrence wrote it around 1928, so this is only a couple of years before he died, and that might well be significant. It was published in 1930. My balcony is on the east side of the hotel, and my neighbours on the right are a Frenchman, white-haired, and his white-haired wife. My neighbours on the left are two little white-haired English ladies, and we are all mortally shy of one another. When I peep out of my room in the morning and see the matronly French lady in a purple silk wrapper standing like the captain on the bridge surveying the morning, I pop in again before she can see me. And whenever I emerge during the day, I am aware of the two little white-haired ladies popping back like two white rabbits, so that literally I only see the whisk of their skirt hems. This afternoon, being hot and thundery, I woke up suddenly and went out on the balcony barefoot. There I sat serenely contemplating the world and ignoring the two bundles of feet of the two little ladies, which protruded from their open doorways upon the end of the two chaises longues. A hot, still afternoon, the lake shining rather glassy away below, the mountains rather sulky, the greenness very green, all a little silent and lurid, and two mowers mowing with scythes downhill just near. Slush, slush, sound the scythe strokes. The two little ladies become aware of my presence. I become aware of a certain agitation in the two bundles of feet wrapped in two discreet steamer rugs and protruding on the end of two chaises longues from the pair of doorways upon the balcony next me. One bundle of feet suddenly disappears. So does the other. Silence. Then lo! With odd sliding suddenness, a little white-haired lady in grey silk with round blue eyes emerges and looks straight at me, and remarks that it is pleasant now. A little cooler, say I, with false amiability. She quite agrees, and we speak of the men mowing. How plainly one hears the long breaths of the scythes. By now we are tete-a-tete. We speak of cherries, strawberries, and the promise of the vine crop. This somehow leads to Italy, and to Signor Mussolini. Before I know where I am, the little white-haired lady has swept me off my balcony, away from the glassy lake, the veiled mountains, the two men mowing, and the cherry trees, away into the troubled ether of international politics. I am not allowed to sit like a dandelion on my own stem. The little lady in a breath blows me abroad, and I was so pleasantly musing over the two men mowing, the young one with long legs in bright blue cotton trousers and with bare black head, swinging so lightly downhill, and the other in black trousers, rather stout in front, and wearing a new straw hat of the boater variety, coming rather stiffly after, crunching the end of his stroke with a certain violent effort. I was watching the curiously different motions of the two men, the young thin one in bright blue trousers, the elderly fat one in shabby black trousers that stick out in front. The different amount of effort in their mowing, the lack of grace in the elderly one, his jerky advance, the unpleasant effect of the new boater on his head. And I tried to interest the little lady. But it meant nothing to her. The mowers, the mountains, the cherry trees, the lake, all the things that were actually there, she didn't care about. They even seemed to scare her off the balcony. But she held her ground, and instead of herself being scared away, she snatched me up like some ogress and swept me off into the empty desert spaces of right and wrong, politics, fascism, and the rest. The worst ogress couldn't have treated me more villainously. I don't care about right and wrong, politics, fascism, abstract liberty, or anything else of the sort. I want to look at the mowers and wonder why fatness, elderliness, and black trousers should inevitably wear a new straw hat of the boater variety, move in stiff jerks, shove the end of the side stroke with a certain violence, and win my hearty disapproval, as contrasted with young, long thinness, bright blue cotton trousers, a bare black head, and a pretty lifting movement at the end of the side stroke. Why do modern people almost invariably ignore the things that are actually present to them? Why, having come out from England to find mountains, lakes, scythe mowers, and cherry trees, does the little blue-eyed lady resolutely close her blue eyes to them all, now she's got them, and gaze away to Signor Mussolini, whom she hasn't got, and to fascism, which is invisible anyhow? Why isn't she content to be where she is? Why can't she be happy with what she's got? Why must she care? I see now why her round blue eyes are so round, so noticeably round. It is because she cares. She is haunted by that mysterious bugbear of caring. For everything on earth that doesn't concern her, she cares. She cares terribly because far off, invisible, hypothetical Italians wear black shirts. But she doesn't care a rap that one elderly mower whose stroke she can hear wears black trousers instead of bright blue cotton ones. Now, if she would descend from the balcony and climb the grassy slope, and say to the far mower, "Cher monsieur, pourquoi portez-vous les pantalons noirs? Why, oh why do you wear black trousers?" then I should say, "What an on-the-spot little lady." But since she only torments me with international politics, I can only remark, "What a tiresome, off-the-spot old woman." They care. They simply are eaten up with caring. They are so busy caring about fascism or leagues of nations, or whether France is right or whether marriage is threatened, that they never know where they are. They certainly never live on the spot where they are. They inhabit abstract space, the desert void of politics, principles, right and wrong, and so forth. They are doomed to be abstract. Talking to them is like trying to have a human relationship with the letter X in algebra. There simply is a deadly breach between actual living and this abstract caring. What is actual living? It is a question mostly of direct contact. There was a direct sensuous contact between me, the lake, mountains, cherry trees, mowers, and a certain invisible but noisy chaffinch in a clipped lime tree. All this was cut off by the fatal shears of that abstract word fascism. And the little old lady next door was the Atropos, Atropos, is it? Who cut the thread of my actual life this afternoon. She beheaded me and flung my head into abstract space. Then we are supposed to love our neighbours. When it comes to living, we live through our instincts and our intuitions. Instinct makes me run from little over-earnest ladies. Instinct makes me sniff the lime blossom and reach for the darkest cherry. But it is intuition which makes me feel the uncanny glassiness of the lake this afternoon, the sulkiness of the mountains, the vividness of near green in thunder sun. The young man in bright blue trousers, lightly tossing the grass from the scythe. The elderly man in a boater stiffly shoving his scythe strokes, both of them sweating in the silence of the intense light. That took a little longer than I thought. I like that. Lawrence is dying, probably. Perhaps he knows he's dying. And he's getting impatient. But even Lawrence's impatience is always very interesting. And I don't think it needs too much explanation. He's also getting tired, and he's a forthright, judgmental, in the positive sense, person. That side of him can get overloaded, and if you read some of his poems, they're absolutely of the ilk of that later Ginsberg that I mentioned before. But I think he's the greatest British artist of the 20th century. You have to be careful around him because of that, because of his impatience, and because of his authoritarianism. But generally, he has good instincts and good intuitions, and he's aware of them, obviously, as you can hear in the essay. Yeah, but I think the essay explains that problem that I was talking about. This abstract space, or space of abstraction, or tendency toward abstraction. Lawrence didn't live to know that the universities and modern culture would be flooded with abstraction upon abstraction. Postmodernism is a word you can use to describe much of that. I mean, perhaps that poem to insanity is abstract in the wrong way. Is there an abstraction or a fragmentation or a nonsensicalness that is the opposite of what Lawrence is talking about? It's an open question for me. It would be, because, like I said, the language in the later poems becomes a lot more punning and toying and Joycean, possibly Joycean. So that's a question for me personally in what I'm doing now. But it's useful to consider, even if this is not entering your creative process, this problem of the abstract. We all have examples of this, and we've seen written examples of people commenting on it, or even on social media. You know, I remember somebody saying a long while ago, maybe during the Iraq War or some horrific, televisual experience, and then they turn and there's a bird chirping outside the window. And it's possibly that difference of experience. And it is a very valid cultural complaint that he has. I'm not saying negate the political entirely, but, well, I don't know, you could appreciate, hone your listening skills, be present, the old spiritual cliche. Encourage people where you think they deserve encouragement. Don't, because of your lack of thought, dismiss someone's idea or ideas, or maybe just some kind of physical effort like washing up or cleaning the car. Do not be flippant needlessly. I don't think any of this is new, but perhaps it's worth mentioning. Observe what's going on around you. Enjoy what has been offered up to you. I mean, if you're a religious person, and I am more increasingly religious, but not in the conventional sense. I tried to delineate that badly in an essay called Toward an Interdimensional Poetics when I was, I don't know, this would be 8, 9, 10 years ago. Because I had this idea of the return of Christianity, but in a totally different fashion. And if you guys do know the Red Book, which I keep referring to, have a look at that, because it confirms some of the things I was trying to say in that essay. I guess for most people who live in this culture, either North American or British, you're kind of atheistic in your tendencies. Have you ever noticed that with poets, as much as they might proclaim to be literally atheists, the example would be Shelley, right? Who wrote tracts against religion. When you enter into the language of poetry, it seems to me that you are in contact with divinity of some kind, and this is the push that you enjoy subconsciously, but you're not very aware of consciously, possibly. And I think that's what, in a sense, some of what Lawrence is enjoying in watching the mowers in the field. There are ways of thinking. Some of them should be discouraged in oneself. Train your thought well. Was there anything else I wanted to add to this video? To summarize, the Motherlode, it's not something that can be taught, really. It's to do with your development, personal. The other thing I notice is with a lot of people in poetry and in life generally, they are constructs of what they've learned somewhere between the ages of 15 and 30, generally speaking. They'll do all their learning at that time, and they carry it with them. And they don't consciously stop learning, but their enthusiasm wanes for this worldly veil of tears, and they don't learn anything beyond a certain limit. And it's not something they're going to tell you, and maybe I'm the same. It's not something they're going to tell you. They're not going to say, "Oh, I don't know much. I don't know about that because I just stopped studying after 1997. I thought I got all the stuff that I need now. I got to get a job. I got to have kids. I got to pay the bills. I got to establish a family if I can. I got to get a certain amount of respect from my peers, and I think I've learned everything I need to know, and I have the tools. And even if I can't prove it to myself, as long as I can prove it to everybody else, then that's enough, mate. Thank you." They won't say any of that, but it does happen. Perhaps I would say definitely with the majority of people. Why do I mention this in relation to the Motherlode? Because you have to devote yourself to it. It's a life cause. The other thing you notice about poetry, and Robert Duncan mentions this as well. I keep mentioning Robert Duncan. I have problems with Duncan, but he says some interesting things, particularly in those Pen Sound talks and interviews, if you're interested. I've just gone and tried to quote him, and now I forget what he's saying. He's saying, he gets into his 40s and 50s, and he said, a lot of the poets I grew up with, they're not doing poetry anymore. And he's kind of fatuous about it, actually, and he's kind of like a bit self-satisfied. Um, he doesn't really question why. Why did they stop? And I think perhaps a lot of the reasons people stop. I mean, this is a very specific thing for certain age groups. This doesn't correspond to everyone's experience of poetry. I'm talking about like you get into poetry, right? You write a lot of poems when you're 15. You've not read much. Maybe you got 3 or 4 books that you read, or certain authors that you've dipped into just in a very limited way. And it's that problem of the excessive feeling. You've got to get all the feelings out, because the teenage life it's very angsty, right? And you've got to get rid of those feelings. But there's no thought, you see. There's no development of thought running concomitant to the upsurge of feeling. And so people do quit poetry, and they do quit, like in their late 20s, because the feeling is gone. I mean, the thinking and the feeling are connected. So if you decide to stop thinking critically, the feeling kind of goes with that. I mean, you can probably convince yourself that you're a thoughtful, passionate person, after that age range. But who's to say that the feelings have kind of been weakened by the non-development of your thinking and of critical thinking. So that's an issue too. The motherlode can't be asked with all that. You have to get to a surfeit of learning, and then it's like I said before, the scales, the notes fall away. You don't know what you're doing, but at least you've got it all under your belt. I think it's something about that. You know, the motherlode, the zone. It's also about relaxation and learning to be in the moment. But I've already mentioned being in the moment, being present, and I don't want to keep repeating myself. I think I've pretty much covered all the points uh, I wanted to make. So I'll leave it at that, really. If you have any thoughts on creative inspiration, um, different phases you've gone through, whether it be in poetry or music or anything else, even small business, or different perspectives about thinking about the world, then feel free to comment. Some housekeeping things. BitChute is acting up. I'm trying to get videos on BitChute, but they don't seem to be uploading properly. So YouTube is the main focus for now. It won't be forever, because I know what YouTube's like, and I want to be established in other locations on the internet. So I'll try to load these videos up on Bright Eon, and I'll leave the links in the next week underneath this video. No, underneath the intro on the channel. Yeah. So, and I'll work hard with BitChute and see if it changes. But for the moment, if there are a number of videos, they'll be on YouTube for the moment, and then I will direct people to use other locations, because I would prefer you to use other locations, because they need encouragement, and YouTube has got far too much encouragement for its own good. So thanks for listening. Have a wonderful day. Take care. I'll see you later.